Pinkamena licked her lips, brandishing Steely as her only weapon. If it was good enough for the son, it would certainly be good enough for the father. Shedding her saddlebag under an apple tree, she looked up, and Death was gone. She barely had time to duck as Death had appeared behind her, shorn a tree right off of its trunk, and missed her neck by inches. She saw a few pink hairs catch the breeze and fly away. Bucking wildly, she caught his shoulder and then went sprawling. Even in his skeletal form, he was much, much heavier than her. By the time she'd righted herself, he was gone again. "Don't worry, Pinkamena," she whispered, turning in quick circles so he couldn't sneak up on her. "He might have you outmatched in height and weight, age, skill, magic, strength, and power." She sagged a little, her mane falling over half of her face, but she gave it a toss. "But you can still whip his sorry flank." She held up Steely with an assertive snort, eyeing the fallen apple tree. Eyeing the fallen apple tree he just smited for no reason than to scare her. "It's not nice to do that. You know how long it takes to grow an apple tree that bears good fruit." Death reappeared in a flash of fire, solid once again. His jaw clattered back and forth, and she could practically hear him yelling something like, "Don't lecture me about my farming." Taking up his scythe in his teeth, he charged at her. Pinkamena shrieked wildly as he came at her with a barrage of crazy, deadly swinging. Back and forth they danced while he carved the ground, split rocks, and leveled trees to kill her. She was a nimble little minx, this one. She practically defied gravity. When he blasted another stone apart trying to cleave her head, he paused to look at her again. She was breathing hard, but otherwise unharmed. He heaved the weapon back into the upright position again. This was too open, too much space. She was too nimble. Rushing at her again with a thundering of hooves, he chased her in a slow circle, back and forth with a massive weapon, always pressing her backward. If only he had something to press her against. Just for a moment, he could strike her in half. Pinkamena panted a little when he paused, watching him adjust his teeth grip on the scythe and adjust his stance. "When was the last time you actually fought someone?" she wondered aloud. "Or any pony, for that matter," she admitted. Since wars were a thing only seen in history books anymore, a pony of the combat persuasion was either a royal guard or into karate like Rainbow Dash. It suddenly struck her that not even Death himself was particularly fight-savvy. He just had a fancy signature weapon. She fought down a grin, but failed. "You don't know how to swing that thing very well, do you?" she said wryly. Death cleaved the tree she had been leaning against, sending a spray of twigs and debris in all directions. She definitely lost some mane that time, for it bannered on the breeze and no longer hit her face. She ran a hoof gently over her forehead, feeling a mild scratch on her skin. Death stopped to look at her again. Not so invincible after all. Pressing his attack, he went after her relentlessly, worming through the orchard until they found themselves at the barn. Pinkamena bucked the doors open, veering back and forth so he wouldn't take her head off. The tiny lantern that lit the building was sputtering in the breeze of their deadly dancing. She finally held out Steely, ready to go on the offensive. The ice cream scoop gleamed in the moonlight. She brandished it at him with a chilling glare. Standing in the massive archway of the barn with his scythe held out, Death clattered his jaw with uproarious laughter. He leaned one way, then the other. On the frame of the massive double doors, Pinkamena waited angrily. Suddenly gathering himself, he slammed both doors with a kick, trapping them inside. Lashing out with his long weapon, he shattered the lantern and set the flame upon the stray floor. The pink mare gasped as the oil lit and started spreading fast. "You'll kill us both!" she shouted angrily. Clattered laughter. Oh, right, he was already dead. Death leapt upon her as the flame shot high, licking hungrily at the barn wall and filling one of the stalls immediately. Dry hay to save for the cold seasons was going up in smoke. Heat roared across the room and started sucking the oxygen out of the air. The ponies danced a terrible dance, and finally, Pinkamena had the bravery to meet his weapon with her own. The ring of metal was loud, but even a slight block sent her reeling. He was strong. He was so strong. Adjusting herself to defend at an angle, she sent one of his swings glancing off of Steely as she walked ever backward. She wasn't a combat mare. She just didn't know how to fight an armed opponent. All it would take was one hit, and she'd be done. For the first time in a long time, fear gripped Pinkamena for her own life. This really could be it. Her flank bumped against something, and for one icy second, she chanced to look behind her when Death paused briefly to adjust his grip on the unholy blade. Stairs. Steep ones. The loft. The upper part of the barn. She gagged briefly, for the fire was growing and pressing hard with its blistering heat. Coughing loudly, she backed upward on the loft stairs, and he followed her like a spirit from Tartarus itself, vengefully swinging back and forth. Wood splintered, flying back and forth as he tried to take her hooves off, tried to cleave her skull, anything to get rid of her for good. She bumped her butt against an angled ceiling. Whinnying wildly, she threw Steely with all her might. It struck a doorstop, knocking it away. The trapdoor of the loft slammed with all its massive weight upon Death's head. She flung herself upon it, reclaiming her weapon and using her body weight to hold it closed. She tried to breathe and think. He was unstoppable. He wasn't enough wearing down like any other pony was. He was already dead, frozen at the peak of his own life, and he would never wear down. The curve of the scythe exploded through the wood of the trapdoor, up between her back legs. She shrieked, rolling wildly before another attack blasted the barrier apart. Heralded by smoke and soon flame, Death imploded out of the lower floor and up into the loft. Pinkamena reared and kicked at him wildly, swinging Steely back and forth. He blocked her with the shaft of the scythe, splitting crates and then catching her right across the chest. She tumbled with a scream of pain, blood blossoming with a straight line spatter across the floorboards. There was a pause in the battle, shock from both sides. He'd managed to get her that time. Clutching at her chest for a moment, Pinkamena's adrenaline dulled the pain as best it could, and she rose on shaking hooves. Whinnying like a wild Amazonian zebra warrior pony, she charged him head-on, swinging wildly back and forth. Death shifted, turning this way and that. Every connection of their weapon sent pain down her wrists. She clobbered him in the shoulder and he staggered. Turning to use her momentum, she was stopped by another heavy block. They were so close together, shivering with effort to overpower each other. But the massive stallion was victor. He shouldered her hard, and she went like a skipping stone into a pile of crates. She shrieked as she was buried in debris. There was silence.